Okay, are you able to see my predict and prevent screen, IoT and property?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me grab one other quick thing here. All right, I think we're ready to go. So yeah, happy to be with all of you. As Robin said, my name is Mark Scheve. I lead what we call strategic growth solutions at HSB. I've been there almost 3 years, and we talked about my prior world, 22 years and counting. It goes really fast. I happen to be located right next door to you folks. I'm based over in central Iowa in the Des Moines area, just a little bit north of the snow that passed through. So I hope all of you that were impacted by that have been able to navigate that successfully. Always happy to connect with people. If you want to find me out on LinkedIn, I'm out there. Feel free to look me up, and happy to connect with anybody that would like to stay in touch. So we're here to talk about IoT, or sensor technology and property. And I thought I would outline just a few key topics for the discussion today. And I certainly want to ask, please stop me, ask questions as we go. I'm not sure if I can monitor the hand raise on this. So Robin, feel free to interrupt me if anybody's got a question or they throw something into the chat. I do have the chat open. Would love for this to be more interactive as we go. And if that means we don't get through all the slides, I think as long as the engagement and the interaction is good, that's certainly fine by me. So yeah, please stop me along the way. So just in terms of some topics to go through, just first hit on a little quick background on HSB, why you're involved in IoT. You may not know HSB as a player in IoT. Some of the P&C industry that we're seeing in property, and I apologize, I'm getting a little back. I don't know if anybody else is.
Robin, I'm wondering if your volume is, or your speaker is still on, microphone.
Okay, sounds like it's kind of gone away there. So we'll hit a little bit on some of the industry challenges that we've been facing in P&C with property, some of the adoption trends that we're seeing currently and that are forecasted for the future for property IoT. I want to go into how the technology works, some of the key factors that we have seen and that others are talking about in terms of what makes IoT initiatives successful, the impact that IoT can have to the bottom line and beyond the bottom line to your relationships overall with your clients, some of the data insights that are emerging out there that are enabling better risk selection, pricing decisions, loss control engagement, et cetera. And ultimately want to offer what we've learned at HSB over the last several years. We've been in this space for about 8 years. It's an opportunity for you to learn from our experience. So anyway, so we offer our perspective, but also kind of the broader industry perspective as well. So we'll move forward. So for those of you that may not be as familiar with HSB, I'll just touch on this really quick here. And there we go, getting the screen moved around. So HSB has been in business for a long time, over 150 years. And when you think about HSB, we've always operated truly at sort of the nexus of where insurance, technology, and engineering come together, looking for ways to solve challenges for our industry, mainly in the property space. We do venture into some other areas as well. And yes, I see a question in the chat as far as the presentation. Would be happy to share the presentation afterward. HSB was acquired by Munich Re in 2009. As you may know, Munich is the largest reinsurance company in the world. HSB is probably most well known, if you look at the left-hand side of this slide, we're probably most well known for our equipment breakdown and our cyber insurance capabilities, but we have many other specialty insurance offerings as well, and a significant focus on the engineering and technology space. So again, essentially wherever you see technology, engineering, and insurance come together, we endeavor to be there. So we work with about 90% of the top 300 or so carriers in the US and many smaller companies as well. But we actually operate all over the world. And the Strategic Growth Solutions team that I lead is focused on our offerings in data, IoT, sensor technology, innovative loss control, and other risk engineering and digital solution capabilities. So that gives you a little bit of a background as to who HSB is and why we play in this space. So let's get into the story of sort of what our industry has been experiencing. And I'm guessing this is not new to any of you on this call, but essentially, when you look over the last decade or so, it has certainly been a challenge, to say the least, for our industry. Core profitability has been extremely challenged by a host of factors. Several of them are listed here when you think about social inflation, the regulatory environment, the upswing in cat activity, the impacts of climate change, supply chains, labor. Almost all of the major economic trends of the last 10 years have been extremely challenging to the insurance industry as well. And if you drill in a little deeper into property specifically, both frequency and severity trends have driven loss costs up significantly over the last several years, roughly about a 50% increase in loss costs, according to LexisNexis, from 2019 to 2023. 2024 numbers still starting to kind of trickle out there. But really, it's a story of both frequency and severity contributing to that uptake. Again, not news, I'm sure, to anybody on this call. Weather events, of course, have been record breaking. And it does finally appear that 2024 is not going to break the record of the previous year, which it seems like every year over the last 3 to 5, we've seen a new record be broken. The trend has certainly not been our friend when it comes to cat activity. And, for national and super regional companies, there's hardly been any safe place that you can go to avoid these challenges. If you try to reduce your exposure to hurricane, you end up running into the Midwest and you see an increased risk of severe convective storm, or you head out west and you run into wildfire, or you run into regulatory challenges. Certainly the picture across the country has been a challenging one. Here's another look at how cat activity has been evolving overall, and weather specifically. And this trend, if you know, goes all the way back to, or this look goes all the way back to 1980 and is adjusted for inflation. So it's not just an inflation issue that's driving our increased loss costs. It's just the overall picture for the last 40 plus years has been very difficult. Now, how much of this is due to climate change versus just expanded growth, economic growth, and development in high-risk areas? I'll certainly leave that to others to debate, but regardless, the overall trend is concerning. So pivoting away from weather, here's a key point. For all the attention, and rightly so, that we've been paying as an industry to cat and weather, the challenge is not just unique to that space. Non-weather has been a significant problem as well, as this chart indicates. Now, 2023 did show a slight decrease, but over the last 7 years, the trend from a non-weather perspective has been a difficult one as well. And breaking this down into results across homeowners and commercial property, we are again starting to see some signs of improved performance. Mileage may vary at your firm relative to other firms, but for the industry as a whole, we are starting to see some positive improvement. But the long-term trend continues to be concerning, and I'm sure those of you who play in the property space, you continue to have a significant focus on addressing these issues. So kind of summing it up in terms of the challenge that we've seen as an industry, I don't want to beat this horse to death, but clearly it's been a lot for our industry to deal with. And I think we can all agree that the risks that we manage, that we price for, that we insure, those are going to continue to evolve. They're going to continue to change. And as it does, we firmly believe that all of us in this industry need to challenge ourselves to think differently. And we have to look for ways to manage risk differently if we're going to continue to move our industry forward. There's been a lot of talk for several years about how do we move from a paradigm that is primarily focused on repair and replace to predict and prevent. And even though that's somewhat cliche to say, we certainly have to continue to challenge the status quo in our industry in order to move us to that place to get to a more sustainable future. So questions on anything that I've shared thus far? Anybody want to chime in? Okay. So we'll transition now to the question of what does all of this really mean for looking at innovative technology capabilities like IoT for property. IoT is certainly something that we've seen start to make an impact across all lines of business. A lot of activity in this space in auto, a lot of it in workers' compensation related to worker behavior and safety, but also some really interesting adoption trends in the property space as well. And we're seeing that adoption continue to accelerate. The whys behind that are many. It's not simply about loss prevention. It's also about needs like business continuity, making business operations more resilient. Operational efficiency is a key consideration that's driving IoT adoption as well. Improved productivity, helping your clients manage facilities and equipment better and with fewer people to be more productive and efficient. It's about unlocking real-time and trend-based insights via data. And the reason I point all of this out is because it's important for us to understand sometimes we can get pretty narrowly focused as an insurance industry on what technology like this means to us. We have to also keep in mind what it means for our customers, what it means for end insureds. And it's important for these solutions, if we're going to continue to see adoption grow, that they provide meaningful benefit to our insureds apart from just simply saving claims. We're really good as an industry at making recommendations to our customers on ways that they can reduce claims. We all know that. And sometimes our insureds comply with those recommendations, sometimes they do not. But the more we can make the story about how these solutions are win-wins for everybody that's involved, the greater that we're going to see the adoption continue to grow. And so for some further evidence of the growth, here's some analysis, a couple key quotes from some recent analysis by Deloitte as far as the growth rate trends for commercial and for homeowners. We're seeing in the commercial real estate space a growth rate of around 78.8% over the last few years, and that's what it's projected to grow at going forward. And then we're also seeing smart home adoption continue to surge around about an 88% increase since 2018, and no reason to believe that this momentum is going to slow down at all. Then I thought I would share, just specific to HSB, what have we seen? Does our experience align with some of these industry trends? And it absolutely does. We've been on a very similar trajectory with our IoT offerings. We have about 60 total programs going in the market with carriers and MGAs and some risk pools. And we're seeing significant growth in sensor adoption, the number of sensors that are out in market through our programs, the number of locations that have adopted sensors, and then all the sensor readings and the data that comes along with that. So tremendous momentum in the IoT space. Questions there while I grab a drink?
Hey, Mark, you mentioned needing to make it a win-win for customers to adopt IoT things that, would help our loss experience. What are some of those win-wins that you've been able to leverage?
Yeah, the biggest one, and we've done a lot of market research on this, the thing that appears to resonate most with end insureds on the commercial side anyway, is business continuity. They tend to think of their operation and their risks more in terms of, staying up and operational versus avoiding a water loss or avoiding a freeze loss or avoiding maybe an electrical hazard type of scenario. There's a tendency for end insureds to think, well, that's why I have insurance. But when you translate it or connect this to keeping them up and operational, that immediately seems to resonate with them. We've also seen, though, from some of the data insights that have been provided, some interesting takeaways for customers in terms of operational efficiency. So when you're seeing things like temperature fluctuation within a facility, for example, there's an opportunity there, depending on the type of operation that they are, for them to better understand some of the costs involved. We've also seen that in monitoring water usage. So water obviously being a significant non-weather source of claim activity, and water is a significant cost for many commercial insureds depending on the type of operation and the processes that they have. Several of them have really had their eyes opened into what their water utilization actually looks like and how it can function more efficiently.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Good question. Other questions? I should share, I'm really good with awkward silence, so I'm happy to wait for questions, but I could certainly keep going as well. All right, we'll keep plugging away. So for those of you that may not be as familiar with how IoT technology typically works in property, I thought I'd kind of walk through how the systems tend to work. And the easiest place to start is certainly with the sensor. And I'm just going to hold up a quick sensor. I don't know if you can see that on my screen or not, but this is just an example of one of our sensors that we have that's out there. Of course, you want to think about what is the sensor intended to monitor? And I call that out on the slide in terms of water or temperature or pipe conditions for potential freeze. It doesn't have to be those three things. Certainly, there's a number of sensor technology solutions out there that monitor things like electrical fire conditions or humidity or air quality. But I think it's helpful when you're thinking about how does this technology work to first zero in on the hardware and what it's designed to monitor. The next thing to think about as you move from left to right on this slide is it's helpful to think about the communication protocol. And what do I mean by that? Of course, we're all familiar with a lot of different communication protocols that exist in order to connect technology with essentially the internet, with the broader network so that we can gain insights into what's going on. And there's many types of those. There's of course cellular that we call out here. There's a technology that is really interesting in the commercial IoT space called LoRa or LoRaWAN. You've maybe heard of. It stands for Long Range Wide Area Network. It's a communication protocol that was originally developed for smart cities as companies like Helium and others were starting to advance capabilities in that space. Our engineers latched onto it and began to explore it because we were looking for a communication protocol that could solve issues with connectivity within buildings, especially when you need signals to transmit through multiple buildings, or to go deeper into those facilities to get down into, say, like mechanical rooms that are in basements of large hospitals, for example. You can imagine where there's all sorts of communication protocol challenges with Wi-Fi or cellular, et cetera. And so the LoRa technology we have found to be extremely effective at creating connectivity in those sorts of environments. So LoRa is an emerging technology that has really been a game changer for IoT adoption. Of course, everybody's familiar with Wi-Fi. Elon's been very active putting satellites up there, creating connectivity as well. So we think we'll see further emergence of satellite connectivity as a protocol that can also further enhance IoT. So I think it's helpful as you're thinking about how the technology works to get into that. I see a couple questions that popped up in the chat, one about quantified savings you showed on the prior slide. I'll definitely get into that in more detail later. So hold that question and we'll get into that in terms of what the industry is seeing and what HSB is seeing. And then another question about adoption and usage of IoT. This may reduce fraud. Will this make regulators and legal more comfortable with using AI in the claims review and settlement process? Yeah, we're as a carrier that plays all over the world and certainly in all 50 states, we've had a number of conversations with regulators about this technology and what it means for the insurance equation. And by and large, we're seeing a lot of receptivity from the regulators. They are interested in things that can help enhance customer experience and reduce losses. Now, how that will translate into openness for adoption of AI, I think continues to remain to be seen. When we talk IoT with regulators, their default bias seems to be receptive. AI, of course, brings with it all kinds of questions about bias and other considerations as well. So we'll see how that translates over time, but we're hopeful as regulators get more and more experience under their belt with seeing how these technologies can benefit everybody that's involved in the value chain, that they'll be more and more open to seeing further adoption and further integration in coverage, claims processes, pricing models, et cetera. Good questions, thank you. Please keep them coming, and I'll try to keep an eye over there on the chat, but feel free, anybody, to step in and interrupt me if I miss a couple questions. So there's the communication protocol, and then of course, essential to that is bringing all of that data into an arena that can be evaluated. And for us, that's the cloud. That's typically the case for most IoT programs. that the data is going to be analyzed and then determinations are going to be made whether there's a need for any alerting activities. So as risk conditions emerge, that could be poor air quality, it could be the presence of water, it could be extremely low or high temperature. Whatever you design the system to monitor, you're going to want to generate alert activity. And then you're also going to want to be able to monitor the behavior that's taken or not taken in response to those alerts. And those are certainly key components of any successful program. So hopefully you found that helpful in terms of a walkthrough of kind of end to end how sensor programs and the technology tend to work. You know, beyond the functionality of sensor hardware and the data analysis, a key piece of any IoT program is an assessment of the risk conditions in the properties that are being targeted, whether that's a residential home, an apartment, all the way up to a large commercial facility. And here's a simple example of the sort of analysis that our engineers conduct. We recently completed a program design for a healthcare program and developed this look into the areas of risk. Of course, you have to think about a lot of different areas within a building that are exposed and how a sensor might help. Not every area that presents risk, of course, is equally concerning or presents as much opportunity for there to be loss saves generated from that. And so it's important to keep those trade-offs and cost-benefit considerations in mind. And then beyond kind of all of those elements of the program, it's really important to realize that IoT technology is about so much more than just understanding exposures and having those addressed by core technology. One of our partner carrier CEOs was recently talking with us about this and said, it's not so much the technology that they need to be convinced of, it's about the overall program design and the implementation process that makes or breaks whether or not a program is successful. And here is a little bit of a picture as to how we break that down, break all of those elements down into what goes into effective program design and implementation. Of course, it all begins with a solid assessment of the risks in a portfolio, and then a curated, well-designed program to address the most critical exposures. Again, you're not going to be able to address everything. You're not going to like the cost benefit of trying to censor up every possible risk area. But certainly you can get at some of the most critical areas that present the most exposure. And then, of course, the engagement of the customer is a very critical piece. Having a well thought out and designed plan for engaging customers, translating why IoT technology makes sense, not only for the benefit of the insurance carrier to reduce losses and for that to translate into better pricing for them, but like we talked about, some of the other benefits that are more meaningful to them to help drive adoption. You got to get all of that messaging curated and then have a well-crafted implementation process. It's got to be as easy as possible. Of course, when you're talking residential and small commercial, it needs to be almost frictionless. For large commercial, where there's more complexity involved, there seems to be a stronger comfort level with commercial facility managers. They really want to make sure that you get these programs right and that we're getting sensors into all the right places. And we have found they've been very open to engagement with us on making sure that we have the right design and the right implementation process. There seems to be an attitude in general amongst commercial facility managers that the facilities that they're responsible for day in and day out and they handle all the maintenance on, they're kind of like their baby. And IoT for us and in other spaces sometimes comes with default concern that this is about like Big Brother. This is about somebody watching me or watching what I'm doing. And certainly that has been a key issue, a critical issue in the auto space as IoT adoption has taken hold there. But we found in the property space, there's not as much suspicion around IoT. It's much more about how this helps them be a better manager of the facility that they're responsible for. And then, of course, any well thought out program needs to have an ongoing evaluation and an adjustment component. You're never going to get it right on the very first shot, but if you're evaluating what the data is telling you and you're having good conversations about the pros and the cons of different tweaks and adjustments, you can get a program more and more dialed in over time. And then, when a program we have found is well designed with the right technology, you get loss saves. And I thought it would be helpful just to share a few examples from our experience and some of the sorts of loss saves that we have seen. This one here is from a larger building in Fort Worth, Texas. Happens to be a museum. And if you're reading what's on the slide, you'll notice that the staff wasn't going to be present over the holidays. And it's interesting, we see that a lot in the facilities that we censor up. A lot of times there's a lot of operations where the weekends, nobody's around, or again, the holidays represent high levels of potential exposure. And in this particular case, a water coil had burst on a rooftop HVAC unit, and nobody was around to notice that, but the sensor was around to notice that. And in response to the alerts, the facility managers took action and were able to prevent a small claim, a small event, from becoming a much larger event, where in the estimation of the facilities managers, the water would have run for multiple days before anybody would have noticed it. So certainly an example of the type of save activity that we see. But it's not just larger buildings where we've seen IoT be effective, or older buildings. Here's an example of a save on a hotel facility that was actually fairly new. I believe this one was just 2 years old. And I hate to say it, but sometimes we have found that newer construction can be problematic. Contractors don't always get everything right in the design and implementation of a new construction setup. And sometimes that leads to claims. We all experience that as an industry. And so in this particular case, based on the alerts that were generated from the IoT program, the staff was able to take action and mitigate another claim that involved some sprinkler lines, and allowed us to take action on this and do some cleanup work before a small problem became a much larger problem. Here's another example of a loss save that took place. If I can get this to advance, there we go. We have a social services program. Here's an example where human error was the issue. So it's not always about the facility or the equipment. Sometimes human beings make mistakes. And in this particular instance, a window was left open that was exposing a uninsulated mechanical room to low temperatures. Thankfully, our sensors were on site. They were able to notice the change in those conditions to alert the staff, who then took action and were able to mitigate it before this claim actually occurred. And so sometimes human error is a driving factor, but we can catch those conditions as human error has an impact, and you see either a change in temperature or a change in the presence of water. We're able to catch those situations and provide the right alerts. And then the last one that I'm going to share, there's certainly lots of these that we could go into. I tried to get a good representative sample. This one is from a golf course, a country club in Virginia. This is a fairly recent save where an HVAC system was located above a facility that was a very expensive room within this historic country club. I'll show you a picture of it. This room was actually named after Thomas Jefferson. It's in Virginia. It's got a lot of historical detail and features to it. And the HVAC unit clogged, and an overflow drain was overflowing. Water was emerging onto that floor and could have potentially gone through the floor down to the second level or down to the bottom level had our sensors not been on site in order to catch that. And when you take a peek at this Jefferson room that was ultimately saved from any water damage, you can just imagine the sort of costs involved had this facility, had this room been impacted by the presence of that water. So those are just some of the examples. Those are really fun, of course, when you see loss save activity. It gets a lot of people interested and excited about the potential for IoT, both from an end user perspective as well as from an insurance carrier perspective. Questions on any of that? Question about life expectancy. It really varies. That's a key piece to be aware of as you think about developing an IoT program. Of course, increased longevity tends to come with more cost. And it's the longevity not only of the sensor itself, but also the battery components. If you have a sensor program that runs on batteries, and many of them do, generally for our sensor lineup, The lifespan is around 5 years. It's certainly a little more on the longer. It's more like 3 to 5, more on the longer side for our higher end commercial solutions, and then more on the lower end for lower cost solutions for small commercial. And then we do have a battery replacement program as well that involves engaging with the end customer, providing them with batteries in order to keep their system up and running. Good question. Any others? I'll keep going here.
Hey, Mark, I couldn't find my mute button fast enough. You mentioned people being more cautious as far as IoT things with auto insurance, but less so with commercial or fire insurance. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, as we've done customer research, there just appears to be a different perspective about a building or a facility than there is about somebody's driving behavior. And I think it comes down to we're not monitoring behavior as much as we are monitoring the risk conditions present in a facility. And if you put yourself in the shoes of a facility manager, what's their primary role? To keep that facility functioning in the way that it's intended to function. And so this essentially helps them do their job versus, say, if you are, a driver that's part of a distribution company, for example, and we're going to put this IoT device, and it's monitoring the vehicle. Well, it's also monitoring the driving behavior, and it's intended to provide insight into how that person performs their day-to-day task. And even though we might say, well, it's helping the person drive more safely, it tends to be viewed as more big brother looking over my shoulder, watching what I'm doing, than sensors do within property facilities. So I don't pretend that we know all of the insights as to why, but we've certainly seen a noticeable difference in the two different contexts.
Makes sense. Thanks, Mark.
You bet, Spencer. Thanks for the question. So I'll go ahead and shift gears a little bit and share some additional perspective on how to think about the potential of IoT and maybe how to best position these programs for success. And I thought to do this, it might be a good idea to share a few insights from an organization that's known as the IoT Observatory. Some of you may be familiar with this organization. HSB is part of it, along with many insurance carriers. I listed several of those in the bottom right of the slide. Many technology companies are part of this group as well. It's headed up by a gentleman by the name of Matteo Carbone. He consults all across the globe on IoT and across all different types of technology on all lines of business. He really is one of the top IoT experts as it relates to the insurance space. And he's provided a lot of insight and expertise to stakeholders, again, all across the globe, across all lines of business. And one of the things that he really emphasizes is that IoT is not just a way to prevent losses. That are certainly those loss saves generate the headlines that get people excited. But in many ways, IoT is more comprehensive than just about generating loss saves. It truly represents a new paradigm for how we do business. And I thought I would highlight a few important points that Matteo likes to call out. IoT, of course, is a form of continuous underwriting. It's a way to continually underwrite without requiring human labor to be aware of and evaluate what's going on within a facility that you insure, or within a vehicle or a driver or a worker that you insure. It's ongoing risk evaluation. And of course, it's a source of unique data insights that impact the entire value chain. And if you look at this wheel on the slide as you go around it, you can think about ways in which this impacts core processes to the way that we deliver all of the services that we bring to the table as an insurance industry. It impacts the customer experience. It can lead to new business opportunities. We've certainly seen it lead to improved retention and deeper relationships between carriers, between HSB as well, and those end insureds. So it definitely impacts retention. And all of these benefits are very real when it comes to IoT. And we have certainly found them to be true at HSB with our program. So ROI from a loss save perspective, though, also tends to be really strong just from a base level benefit of the technology. And I would argue that makes IoT unique in the space of innovative technology and insurance. When you think about a lot of technology offerings that have come into the insurance space, and you think about the payoff and the time frame that's involved in achieving that payoff, a lot of times, what have many of us heard over the years? You got to get technology fully implemented and adopted. You got to get, you got to allow significant time for all the algorithms to be calibrated to obtain all the data that you're looking to obtain, and then to get that implemented into your process. And then down the road, as all the stars align and everything, you start to see the benefit. IoT comes with that full value chain of benefits, but we've certainly seen that you can generate positive ROI just at that baseline level of getting technology out there, generating loss saves. So it's really kind of unique in the technology space of just even beginning to dabble in IoT can generate solid ROI, and then that can scale as you further the adoption. It looks like a couple more questions have come in. Are companies offering discounts for those opting to use a sensor in their homes? Yes, we are seeing that. We're also seeing discounts on the commercial side as well. Those vary a great deal from company to company. Refining those discounts over time is going to depend on the data and proving out the actual bottom line benefits. But yes, we're seeing discounts. We're also seeing examples, though, where IoT is being required. So you think about, a class of business that is particularly challenged when it comes to things like non-weather water. We have seen some underwriting units start to require IoT if they're going to continue to remain on a particular risk. And in the MGA space, there's been some really innovative offerings start to emerge, especially in the construction and builders risk space, where IoT is a non-negotiable. It's absolutely part of the program that if you want to access a particular insurance offering, you got to have the IoT integrated into it as well. How are you able to use the data that you acquire, and what was the cost to implement the data analysis tools? So a lot of different ways to use the data. We'll go into a lot of that in more detail, but it's really about understanding what, at least from a property perspective, both the facility data and then the behavior data from the management that's on site. So when you're monitoring things like temperature fluctuation over time, or the presence of water, or the presence of humidity or air quality, you see a lot of interesting trends in that data that can then be married up with loss trends that a carrier is seeing in order to understand where those correlations exist and where the data is ultimately predictive. But we get a lot of questions, for example, about resilience. How can we better monitor facility resilience to things like cold temperatures when polar vortexes happen? And I'll show you a few additional details on some upcoming slides, but a lot of interesting insights that are available that are indicators of one facility being more resilient than another, which ultimately factors into whether or not that facility is likely to have a loss in the near or the long term. How are you able to address concerns around cybersecurity, malware, data privacy as it relates to IoT? Great question. A lot of factors that go into that. Certainly, there's kind of foundational compliance. You should absolutely look for SOC 2 compliance on any IoT program. We certainly have that. The communication protocol is also critical to this. And, in a residential context, Wi-Fi is certainly common and normal, but does come with some risks from a cybersecurity perspective. And I would say Wi-Fi even more so brings those risks in a commercial context. In fact, we found a lot of resistance to Wi-Fi in the commercial space. And that's why for our commercial programs, for our commercial technology, we have bypassed Wi-Fi entirely as a communication protocol in order to prevent those risks from leading to real issues down the road. And that's why we use cellular and LoRa. But it's absolutely a real issue. Good core compliance in risk management practices is an absolute must. And then thinking about those connectivity issues is an important one as well. Ultimately, though, if somebody, there's no way to eliminate all of the risks, and you just have to help people understand what those are, and then make a determination as to whether they're willing to move forward with adoption or not. Great questions. All right, so some additional insight from the IoT Observatory on what makes for a successful IoT journey. If you're going to go beyond just simply a pilot or a test, some people like the word pilot, don't like the word pilot, but if you're going to do some kind of experiment around IoT and then ultimately look to go beyond just an experimental phase, this is absolutely critical. These are keys that we in the IoT Observatory have learned to an organization having a successful experience. And first and foremost, it's about alignment. It's about aligning around the vision of what you're hoping to achieve from your IoT program with some very clearly defined goals for success. Defining those goals, making sure that you're measuring, that you have the right KPIs so that you're getting strong indications of the progress or the lack of progress toward those goals are absolutely essential. It's interesting when you're talking about a relatively new and innovative space like IoT, there's a lot of different perspectives that people bring to the table or that they have in the back of their mind. So clarifying and aligning around what definitions of success are the most meaningful is absolutely important. And then a well-defined process for coordinating across business units. There's a lot of different business units that are interested in IoT programs. Of course, underwriting and loss control are the two that generally are most, immediately at the table wanting to be involved. But certainly pricing and actuarial and data teams, claims as well, have played a very critical role in IoT programs. And so it's important for there to be at least awareness and understanding, but then also if these different departments, intend to be involved, making sure they understand how best to be involved in these programs so that they can receive the sort of insights that they're looking for, and then ultimately take the kind of actions that they expect to be able to take based on those insights. It's critical to have strong governance, of course, executive support. All of these things may sound like common sense, but it's actually one of the biggest challenges. But when you head down this path and you do the work to define what success means, you define the goals, you build out the processes, you can really set yourself up well for an overall successful experience. And then what's the expected payoff? And we'll get into this is where we start to get into some of the ROIs. And, this is again from the Insurance Observatory. I'll share some of the HSB data here coming up, but Matteo would tell you there's a significant ROI to be gained and that carriers are seeing with IoT. On the left is kind of a visual depiction of the economics of the P&C, the standard P&C insurance world. On the middle right is how IoT impacts those economics. There is a spend involved, of course, with bringing this technology in, but there are also payoffs. And on the far right, you start to see some of the examples of those successes. These are all from water programs that the observatory is aware of. You see a $6 benefit for every invested dollar on programs around apartment condos, schools, office buildings, houses of worship, a $4 benefit on a program around ecclesiastical buildings. There's an example of a $3, so at 300%, think about it in percentage terms, $3 for every $1 spent would be 300% on a program around some properties, a program that is targeting schools and medical offices. And then in the construction space is one that has been highly impacted by water issues and seeing some significant impacts there from observatory members, including a $25 benefit, which is certainly an eye-popping number. But that's on a 5-year program from some selected risks within a construction program. And I see that, yep, got a time check there. I appreciate that. Other ways that there's value across IoT. From our experience, again, the benefits go beyond just simply ROI. All of these factors matter. They're all part of the equation. Data is a key component of it as well. And of course, data, it's almost become cliche that programs like this are all about the data, but it's absolutely critical that data be considered in any initiative that we undertake. And I'll talk a little bit more about the data and then certainly make sure we allow enough time for any additional questions. So these are just a few quick snapshots of some of the data trends that we have seen across our programs. And I talked earlier about facility, resilience. And of course, as insurance companies, we tend to think about, how can we better predict which facilities are likely to experience a loss from, say, like a freeze event. And of course, we tend to look at either historical loss runs, or maybe we send risk engineering out and they do a loss control evaluation. But imagine you insure a couple facilities in the same city, and on the outside, they may look very similar. They may have, be roughly the same age, the same construction type, they may be the same class of business, but maybe they're managed differently. And that tends to show up in terms of the internal temperature that's experienced in key, mechanical rooms, for example, or other key risk areas where low temperature could lead to freeze and could lead to a water damage claim. You're not always going to be able to pick up on that from the traditional ways in which we evaluate risk. But with IoT, you can look at how a facility has performed over time and make a judgment as to how you want to take action in response to that. It may be that you no longer want to insure that particular risk. It may be that you want to change something with the terms and conditions, or you may want to adjust the pricing. These particular views that I'm showing here on the slide are more of an aggregate look at alert activity from some significant events over the last couple of years, but you can also look at this down at an individual facility level as well. And it's really significant when freeze events pop up. We certainly see surges in the alert activity. You can also get insight into the risk management behavior of the management teams that are on site. You can look at how responsive they are to the alerts that are being generated by their IoT program. Are they addressing those risk conditions, and are we seeing those start to turn around and improve? All of these things are greater indicators of the risk that you're on. And of course, risk managers at insured locations want to believe or want to tell you that they do a good job of kind of managing their exposures. But with IoT, you get another level of validation as to whether their activities are actually making a difference or not. Questions on any of that? Do we see application on the auto side with EVs, batteries, to predict malfunction, fire risk? This is certainly something that we are actively exploring, whether it's with electric vehicles or with things like golf carts and scooters. In fact, I had a neighbor just in the last year that had a fire loss from a golf cart that was recharging in their garage. So we know this is an emerging issue. We're exploring some technology opportunities on it. You may have heard of one particular technology. I actually have a sensor here from Ting Whisker Labs. This is one of the more prominent technology IoT solutions that we and others have partnerships with in bringing this out to market. It's actually monitoring for electrical fire hazard within homes. And we're drilling into some of the data flows that they are seeing in order to see if we can pick up on the signal that may be related to batteries. Nothing that has emerged yet that we can confidently say we've been able to identify the signal of when that hazard is present, but it's absolutely a real issue for the industry, and one that we intend to continue to dig into. Good question. Others on anything that we've covered thus far or on the data? I mentioned that I would share a little bit about HSB's ROI that we've experienced, that our clients have experienced on their programs. This is a number that we have published, and so we're very comfortable sharing. Across our programs, we are seeing more in that neighborhood of a $6 return for every dollar spent. I recognize that's an eye-popping number. It's a significant ROI, and it doesn't mean that if you put a sensor in every facility that you insure that you're going to get a 600% return on it. But when you're very targeted in where you deploy IoT and very thoughtful about the risks that you're looking to target with the sensor capabilities, you can absolutely generate meaningful return. Our clients have been seeing that, and it's been very, very interesting to watch as these programs continue to grow. And I think I'll skip over this. I was just going to give some quick profiles on a few, I guess, case studies programs that we have in the middle market commercial space, in the small commercial space. These are a couple of views of kind of the journey or the walk. We'd like to talk about crawl, walk, run as phases that carriers will go through in adopting IoT. It's always important to, to start small, to get your footing, to figure out how the technology works and to get it integrated into your internal operations. But we have certainly found that we can get the hang of it with carriers and generate from those learnings some real significant adoption levels. And we have multiple clients that are aggressively moving into scale in the water space, for commercial, in the electrical fire space, et cetera. Do you find ROI varies by size of company, larger return for larger insurance company with more commercial business? Our ROIs have primarily been, we haven't published anything yet specific to residential. So all of our experience has been in the commercial space. Nothing that we would say is statistically significant yet. We have large carrier partners, we have small carrier partners, we have some that are kind of micro regional and all the way up to national that are doing IoT. And thus far, I would say nothing materially different in terms of that experience, provided that we do a good job of really targeting the right classes of business and the right geographies where there are these issues. Of course, it does no good to put sensors into risks that aren't seeing any issues with water or freeze losses. But if we do a good job with program design, we're able to generate significant ROIs. Those ROIs do vary. We just aren't yet sure, to where we could say that those variances are statistically significant or actually credible, or if they're not just coincidental. And I think I'm going to skip over this because there's only 2 minutes to go. I was going to touch a little bit on an emerging communication protocol that is predicated on a partnership with Amazon. As many of you may know, Amazon has some very interesting communication capabilities across its network of IoT devices, and we've been able to uncover some ways in which some additional technology can camp onto that. I'll leave that there for now. Any other questions that the group has before we get to closing time here on this meeting today? I really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about our experience. Again, I hope that you learn from what we've gathered. It's been a journey over the last 7 years of a lot of trial, a lot of error, a lot of learning along the way, and then updating the way these programs work based on those learnings. We're very bullish on the future of IoT from a loss save perspective, as well as from the perspective of unlocking additional data insights that can be meaningful to all of our businesses. So again, thank you for the time. It was really a pleasure to be with you. Robin, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mark, for this wonderful presentation. Very informative and lots of good learning going on. Since we're not in person, let's see if we can give them some appreciation using the react button at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So we'll meet again. February 5th is the next virtual meeting, and that will be with Kimberly Harris of the Normal Town Council. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and we'll see you next month.
Take care, everyone. Good to be with you.